because what you cannot say about type 2 diabetes is that you don't have any insulin. It never goes to zero like it would in a type 1 diabetic. In reality, the timeline would look something like this. They started with this very low, modest level of insulin, like a healthy insulin-sensitive person has. It starts to climb over the years. And then, in fact, let me express it a different way. So here is insulin and here's glucose, and the insulin, because of their diet, they're getting more and more insulin resistant. And so even though their insulin is now multiples higher than it was before, but the insulin, it's not working as well, but it's working well enough that it can keep glucose normal. And this is why so often when we look at type 2 diabetes as a glucose disease, we don't diagnose it until a decade or so later than we could have, because it's only once the body becomes so resistant to its own insulin, and maybe in some people the insulin starts to come down a bit, but never goes back to as low as it was, never. It might come down a bit though, but it's still multiples higher than it was before. Now the glucose starts to climb, and then we detect the problem. So our glucose-centric paradigm of type 2 diabetes leads us to detect the problem too late, but it also leads us to treat it very, very poorly, because in this same paradigm of now elevated insulin and elevated glucose that we call type 2 diabetes, which it is a state of elevated insulin and glucose and glucagon, but that's another matter. The clinician will say, the clinician will have no regard for the insulin. Yep. They will just be looking at the glucose, and in a moment of true scientific and biomedical tragedy, they will say, let's just push your insulin up even higher by giving you insulin secretagogue medications like sulfonylureas, or outright give you insulin, exogenous insulin, and then we'll push the insulin to super physiological levels higher than it ever was before. And that is enough to overcome the insulin resistance, at least for a time. And we've reached our clinical goal, which is to lower your glucose. But the tragedy in that paradigm is that when we give a type 2 diabetic an insulin therapy, they get fatter and sicker than they were before. And the more we push up the insulin to keep the glucose in check, they become 3 times more likely to die from heart disease and twice as likely to die from cancer. And they'll typically gain about 20 pounds in the first 6 months of insulin therapy. So this is not, so we end up killing them, but we do so with great glycemic control. It's not a glucose disease. It's a disease of hyperinsulinemia. And so putting the insulin even higher is the worst thing we can do. And the analogy I use in the book is just so good, so I got to come back to it. It's, if I may say so myself, it's so good. It's like trying to treat a type 2 diabetic by giving them insulin therapy is like trying to help an alcoholic by giving them another glass of wine. You're giving them more of the very substance that caused the problem.